what you were being accused of. So how could you know how to defend yourself? It must have been an absolutely awful position to be in. So the pressures on an individual when the Inquisition came knocking at the door must have been absolutely unbearable.
Isolated, scared, and disorientated, the prisoner would be thrown into jail. It's difficult to imagine the conditions in a medieval prison, but enough written information survives to paint a vivid picture. As one prisoner wrote upon his eventual release,
"The cell floor was brick, the walls formed of stone and very thick. The place was very cold in winter and so damp that my clothes were in a state of perpetual moisture. Such was my abode for nearly 3 years."
Although there were rules governing the conditions in which prisoners were to be kept, they were not necessarily adhered to. The local inquisitor was required to inspect the prison on a weekly basis, but this assumed he was doing his duty with care and attention, which wasn't always the case. One report on the conditions in the prison in Cordoba refers to the jail as
"Horrible dens, overrun with rats, snakes, and other vermin, where the wretched captives sickened in despair were starved, and the attendants maltreated them like dogs."
The Inquisition tribunal in Cordoba was infamous not only for the conditions in its jail, but also for having a particularly sadistic inquisitor, Diego Luquero.
He became notorious for arresting hundreds and hundreds of suspect Christians, that is, new Christians or conversos. And in fact, in 2 occasions in the early 16th century, he actually had over 100 people burnt in one afternoon. And the burnings took place just in front of the castle in what was ironically known, as it still is, as the Field of the Holy Martyrs.
It was all too easy for sadistic inquisitors to indulge their viciousness. They, and they alone, decided when, how, and how often to exploit the torturer's talents. One of the Inquisition's most imaginative tortures was the toca, or water torture. The victim was bound, secured to a rack, and forced to swallow a long length of absorbent cloth. When no more cloth could be forced into the throat, water was poured into the mouth, triggering the swallowing reflex. The victim would ingest more and more of the material until it entered his stomach. The cloth could then be wrenched out, with agonizing results. Although these early victims of the Inquisition were largely Jews, or at least suspect new Christians, anyone who was not an ethnic Spaniard and a true Roman Catholic had become unwelcome in Spain by the end of the 15th century. Spain today is a modern, vibrant, cosmopolitan country, secure under its Catholic faith and proud of its royal family. There are only a few visible signs of the Inquisition ever having existed. But 500 years ago, Spain, as we know it today, did not exist. The land was divided into a number of separate kingdoms. In the Plaza de España in Seville, ceramic murals chart the major events that have helped forge modern Spain. Across the 54 murals, a number of themes emerge: royalty, religion, and war. Each one vital to the story of the Spanish Inquisition. Up to the time of the Inquisition, many of the Spanish kingdoms had been ruled by Muslims, or Moors. The Moorish influence can still be seen today. The The city of Cordoba is dominated by a single building, the mezquita, or mosque. This massive building, the size of 4 football fields, was once one of the jewels of the medieval world. It's clear evidence of the Moorish domination of this part of Spain. But the Christian monarchs of Castile and Aragon wanted to unite Spain under a single government and a single religion, Catholicism. As has happened many times since, wars began in the name of religion. In the ensuing battles, the Moors were driven further and further south by the Christian armies. The Moors were finally overthrown in 1492, the same year that King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile sent Christopher Columbus on the voyage that eventually led to the discovery of the New World and the Americas. The Spanish still celebrate the victory of the Christians over the Muslims. In Alcoy, in the southeast of the country, the centerpiece of the annual fiesta is a reenactment of the Moors being ousted by Christians. It's a colorful and exciting scene to the modern tourist. But it speaks of a time, not that long ago, when religious intolerance invariably led to violence and bloodshed. Isabella and Ferdinand probably thought their troubles were over. They soon discovered that despite 100 years of conversions, the Jews and their new Christian descendants were still a major problem.
As the Christian frontier was rolled back and the Christian kingdoms moved further south and incorporated the various Jewish communities in the great cities like Cordoba, Seville, and eventually Granada, they had to ask themselves, what were they going to do with these Jewish communities? Were they going to tolerate them? Now, Islam can tolerate both Jews and Christians because they count as children of the book. They have a special position within the Muslim religion. But Christianity doesn't have that room for maneuver. And it was thought to be a Christian duty to convert all people of a different religion to faith in Christ, the Son of God.
Ferdinand and Isabella were good Catholics, but they also craved political power. They'd underestimated the volatile hatred between Christians and Jews, which threatened peace and unity. But they'd face a terrible loss if everyone who was then a Jew, or who had Jewish ancestry, were expelled or locked up. Many of these people were Spain's most outstanding and upstanding citizens. Isabella and Ferdinand couldn't afford to lose them from society. But nor could they allow the instability and hatred to continue. Clear and decisive action was needed. In March of 1492, they gave the remaining Jews an ultimatum: convert to Christianity or leave Spain for good. The Jews of Spain had 6 months to comply.
I think the dilemma which the Jewish families faced in the 15th century to convert, and especially when Isabel ordered them in 1492 to convert or leave the country, was a particularly difficult decision for them to make. Would they betray their religion, or would they turn their back on a country where they'd lived for hundreds of years? And I think for them, having to make this decision must have been an absolutely cruel one.
Not only was it cruel, it didn't work as the king and queen had hoped. Resentment grew even stronger between old Christians and the new converts from Judaism. Old Christians simply didn't trust the motives of the conversos or new Christians any more than they had for the last 100 years.
Conversos were not feared, they were hated. They were hated because, first, the general population refused to believe in their sincere conversion to Christianity, to Catholicism. And so this is seen as treacherous. Because they are not sincere, that means that they're Jewish.
The old Christians were convinced that many of these new conversos were secretly maintaining their Jewish faith, that they kept not only Christian holy days but also Jewish Sabbaths and festivals, days that required special and obvious preparation.
He trimmed his hair on Fridays because it is a special ceremony for the Jews and because it is a sin for them to trim hair, beards, or nails.